In more than 20 years of practicing medicine, I've collected interesting facts about your body. Join me on a tour head to toe of
Your body is interesting.
Welcome. I promised that we would cover the subject of the human body head to toe. So, starting from the top, we start with hair. Contrary to commercials that talk about shampoo nourishing and making your hair healthy, I got news for you. Hair is dead. So, at best, conditioner coats your hair. Uh, Also, in terms of hair growth rate, cutting your hair, despite what your barber will tell you, does not foster faster hair growth for people who are trying to grow their hair long. There's a limit on your hair growth. It's genetically programmed to start splitting at a certain length, which varies between people. That's why some people can have hair down to their belt, and other people don't get their hair cut for years, and it doesn't pass their shoulders. The only thing that trimming your hair does do is that when there is a split, like a run in a fabric, by cutting it, it allows it to grow as long as it could. But there's a limit. This genetic programming of hair length occurs in hair other than on your head, fortunately, like on your arms. Because you got to ask yourself, why doesn't the hair on my arms grow as long as the hair on my head? Because of this programming. Now, just like a lot of genetic things, there can be a mutation, a defect, lead to a disease, and in fact there is one regarding a mutation in the genetic control of hair growth on one's body called werewolf syndrome. Now, speaking of barbers, they have an interesting history. Since the Middle Ages up until the 1700s, roughly, barbers were the folks that dealt with minor surgery. And another major function they performed was popular, if not one of the few treatments at the time, was bloodletting. So in the shop, they would have this pole that the patient would hold onto as they were being bloodlet, and the pole was painted red to try to soften the gore of the blood dripping onto the pole. And after the white bandages that were used during the procedure were cleaned, they would use the pole as a sort of laundry line to wrap the bandages around and lean out back and let it dry. So what you ended up with was the symbol of the barber, that candy cane looking thing outside the barber shop, a red pole with white stripes. Then in the 1900s, a blue stripe made its appearance, at least in America, to match our flag and also symbolize the veins from which the blood was let. Now there's still, believe it or not, to this day, a couple diseases that are still treated in this medieval way of bloodletting. There's polycythemia, which is the body makes too much blood, and no doubt the solution is remove the blood. And also something called hemochromatosis, where the intestines absorb too much iron, and among other places, the iron deposits inside the red blood cells, and so by bloodletting them, you effectively remove the body of this excess iron in a way that's accessible. In the 1200s, the Catholic Church decreed that clerks of the Holy Order, during their practice of medicine, should not cut the flesh. And this practice of cutting was to be left for people who were not physicians and learned men of science, but rather mere dentists and barbers. And so the barber, which had a shop in pretty much any town, not every town had a hospital, took on the role of performing minor surgery. Now, this schism between the Department of Surgery and the Department of Medicine exists to this day. During my own residency, in the cafeteria, the surgical residents would sit at one table, medical guys would sit at another, and they never mingled. Even in the hallway, you wouldn't even really say hello. In fact, they had sort of a nasty expression that internists, the medical folks, knew everything but did nothing. For example, people had diabetes, they saw their doctor, they still have diabetes. And conversely, the surgeons did everything but knew nothing. So if they had a bad gallbladder, they just cut it out. But anything esoteric and academic beyond that, they didn't know. Well, fortunately, both departments serve their purpose, and together they're both necessary. Now, the word barber is from the Latin barba, meaning beard. This dates back to Alexander the Great. He noticed that during warfare, his soldiers who were on horseback often would be grabbed by the beard, and the enemy would slay them with their sword. So he came up with the idea of shaving their beards, and this became a standard in Greece that the Greeks had shaven faces, and anyone who wasn't from that district or from that general district, outsiders or foreigners, were known as barbarians. So you see the stem of the word again. Anyhow, getting back to one's own hair, if you look down at the top of someone's head, this spot here called the vertex, the hair doesn't grow out like a palm tree or a fountain. It actually spirals out. It either spirals clockwise or counterclockwise. Now, that is another thing that's genetically determined. In fact, if you have two identical twin infants, if one of them's hair spirals out clockwise, it's guaranteed they're going to be right-handed. It's also a nice way, if they're different, that the parents could identify which kid is which kid. And if it's counterclockwise, that person is not going to be right-handed. They're either going to be a lefty or ambidextrous, meaning they can write with both hands. Now, when hair follicles get old, when a person gets old and their hair turns white, it's because the hair follicle from which it stems is no longer making its pigment, whether it was black or brown or whatever the pigment was. And so you end up with white hair. But as you know, there are some people who have gray hair. And what that is bubbles inside the hair follicle. And when the light goes through the bubble, it diffracts it and gives it a silver appearance. The hair helps with temperature regulation. 80% of your body's heat escapes from your head, which is the foundation of when your mother told you to wear a hat in the winter. Effectively, a head of hair is like a fur cap. Last point, sideburns. What do sideburns have to do with burning? It's a trick question. Nothing. The term was coined after a general who had some very prominent sideburns named General Burnside.